So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. We have a lot on our plate today, so let's get started with today's highlights. Canceled orders and delayed overseas construction projects have dealt a severe blow on Korean shipbuilders, and they're now taking on extreme measures to stay afloat. And Korea's corporate giants are also reinventing themselves at a fast pace, saying goodbye to unprofitable businesses and shedding jobs with hopes of boosting profits. We sit down with an expert to talk about this. But first, Korea's household debt in the third quarter grew at its fastest pace since the fourth quarter of 2002, when related records were first compiled. The Bank of Korea says the amount of debt, including purchases on credit, stood at around $1 trillion as of the end of the third quarter, up roughly $30 billion from the previous quarter. The central bank adds, however, that the record growth came from an increase in spending as purchases on credit, including credit card bills, shot up by more than $3 billion, while the growth of household loans slowed in the July to September period from the quarter before. The growth of mortgage loans also slowed in the third quarter, but rose by roughly $17 billion. Korea's shipbuilding giants have found themselves in choppy waters in recent months, posting eye-watering losses on the back of delayed constructions and canceled orders. So to make up for the losses, the so-called Big Three are taking some aggressive cost-cutting measures. Our Kim Min-ji has this report.
There will be no massive restructuring. The nation's big three shipbuilders say they will try to maintain their labor pool as much as possible and instead cut jobs and salaries at the boardroom level. According to industry sources, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, Hyundai Heavy Industries, and Samsung Heavy Industries are tightening their belts, but non-executive employees shouldn't be affected. Among other steps, Daewoo Shipbuilding plans to sell non-core assets and cut down on material costs in return for $3.6 billion from its creditors. The company has also laid off 30% of its executives and cut the remaining executive salaries by between 10 to 20%. It has also accepted voluntary retirement for 300 executives. Hyundai Heavy Industries is also cutting costs across all units for the first time. Presidents from all arms will not be accepting their salaries, while executives have seen their wages cut by up to 50% and 10% for directors in its shipbuilding-related arms. It has suspended unnecessary training and event programs until it turns a profit, and it will also reduce the number of new hires. The same goes for Samsung Heavy Industries. It has cut executives by 30% and says the company will accept voluntary resignations but carry on with new hiring plans as scheduled. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
Korea's major companies are hoping to change for the better as economic uncertainties remain both at home and abroad. And many of them are giving up less profitable businesses to focus on the ones that are doing better. Let's take a closer look.
Many companies have disappeared or changed hands this year in Korea with harsh restructuring measures hitting major business units under some of the country's biggest conglomerates such as Samsung, LG, and SK. Samsung Group is restructuring itself by reducing the number of promotions and shedding thousands of jobs, while also looking for ways to focus on its profitable businesses, such as electronics and finance, rather than construction and shipbuilding. These efforts also come ahead of an expected power transition from the group's chairman Lee Gon-hee to vice chairman Lee Jae-yong. LG and SK are also stepping up efforts for transformation, scaling down sectors that have been less lucrative like the solar business, and investing more in areas considered more profitable. There has also been a frenzy of shutdowns and mergers and acquisitions driven by the government. Efforts to restructure debt-laden and unprofitable companies have been in full force to try to stave off effects from a further slowdown in China and an anticipated rate hike from the US. Amid falling exports and poor performance from many corporate giants, will these aggressive restructuring efforts bring in more profits and boost competitiveness for Korean companies?
And to tell us more about this, Professor Yang Jun-suk from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
All right, so Korean companies are undergoing major restructuring. What does this tell us about our economy and the situation that these companies are in right now?
Okay, I think the restructuring reflects the times that we're in. Probably the biggest factor here is the continuing global recession. And it reflects the low profitability of these companies, so that, well, anytime you have a recession and low profitability, the companies you look at this as an opportunity to downsize and perhaps improve their productivity, and that's what the companies, I think, are doing. It also gives a chance to increase the Korea's low productivity. Korea's productivity has always been a chronic problem, especially in the services sector. So this may be seen as an opportunity to try to improve that. Coupled with that is the Korean fear of international competition. The Chinese is getting better, the Japanese goods are getting cheaper, so the Korean companies want to stay competitive. And then there's the government pressure. The government wants the economy to recover, and they think that having this type of restructuring is a good way of doing it.
All right, then how does this year's restructuring efforts by companies compare to the ones that we've seen in previous years?
Okay, well, there always has been some restructuring in the financial sector. Standard Chartered Bank is laying off some of its people. That's been usual in the financial sector, though this is probably bigger than the other restructuring we've seen in the recent past. What's really been unusual is that some of the chaebols are restructuring themselves more or less voluntarily. Samsung has sold off some of its defense industries to Hanwha. It has sold off its chemical industries to Lotte. Other chaebols have been buying subsidiaries, selling subsidiaries, trying to specialize in certain areas that they think they're good at. And I think that's actually a good thing in the end. And then also, I think it reflects the pressure of the government. The government is planning a big restructuring at the end of this year or perhaps the beginning of the next year, trying to do it through the banks. And chaebols and some of the companies, I think, are trying to get a head start so that they do this voluntarily rather than be forced to by the banks.
Now we're wondering, wouldn't these kind of restructuring efforts kind of add more uncertainty to the domestic economy? I mean, what are some of the positive and negative effects that could come from this?
Okay, well, the positive effect is that hopefully this will improve productivity and it would improve profitability. It's one of the reasons that everybody's so gung-ho about restructuring is that recent studies have shown that a lot of Korean companies are becoming what's called zombie companies.
Zombie companies.
So they're not making enough profit to pay off the interest that these companies have to pay, let alone pay off the principal. And one of the factors behind Japan's lost 20 years is thought to be the banks supporting these zombie companies. So I think the Korean government wants to cut this right off. And as I mentioned before, they're planning a big restructuring at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. So this is, well, instead of being forced into it by the government, I think they're looking at this as an opportunity to do this voluntarily.
Well, like you said numerous times, the government is stepping in and they're calling for all-out efforts to restructure the corporate sector, and they also called out to eliminate zombie companies. What's the reason behind such a proactive action taken by the government over this?
Well, I think basically, as mentioned before, it's the fear of Japan's last 20 years. Korea, like Japan, is heading toward the aging society. We're afraid that perhaps we run out of engines of growth. So unless we restructure Korean economy to move toward more higher value-added sectors, more innovative sectors, Korean growth is going to slow down and perhaps even stop. And that will be very harmful during the aging economy for the next 20, 30 years.
All right. Well, global credit rating agency Moody's actually said that it expects positive outcome from Korea's all-out efforts to restructure the corporate sector. But then at the same time, it said it was concerned about the government's, how the government is leading all these kind of restructuring. How does Korea's approach differ from that of other countries then when it comes to restructuring and reshuffling?
Okay, when you look at other capitalist economies, especially the United States and Great Britain, they usually do it through the pressure from the stockholders. But in Korea, well, part of the problem is we have our stocks are more dispersed. So we have less major stockholders who can go against the 재벌 owners.
Okay.
And then there does seem to be some irrational respect for the 재벌 owners in the market itself. They don't like to go against whoever's in charge, the family that's in charge of the 재벌s. And then the major stockholders do seem to be government or government-affiliated companies or banks which are dependent on government. So when government wants to do something, it could bear a lot of pressure onto these companies. So that's why I think the restructuring Korea is more of a government-led venture rather than stockholder-led venture.
Okay, well, it looks like the economic uncertainty both at home and abroad is going to continue for a while, right? So in your opinion, what do you think the companies and the government should do in order to maximize positive results from restructuring?
I do think restructuring is necessary. I think Korean companies do need to pay more attention to productivity and profitability. So this restructuring, I think in the end, if it's carried out correctly, will be a good thing. The companies, when they're restructuring, need to pay attention to profits and productivity, but the timing is a little worrisome because one of the problems that Korean economy is suffering is low aggregate demand, and this type of uncertainty, this type of restructuring tends to increase unemployment and perhaps reduce aggregate demand. So in the short term, it may be making problems worse. One of the ways to sort of mitigate that is for the government to try to increase welfare, increase unemployment protection so that the aggregate demand will not fall very much due to these restructuring.
Okay, thank you so much for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
Despite falling exports, Korean cosmetics is a hot export item to China and other countries in Asia. And now local cosmetics companies are looking to take their products to less traditional markets outside the region. All right, Kim Ji-yeon tells us more.
Korean cosmetics giants are increasingly turning to the Middle East and South America for growth. Amore Pacific is planning to enter Brazil and Colombia by 2017, even as it plans to expand its footprint in Dubai and the Middle East next year. LG Household and Healthcare, which owns the Face Shop, hopes to open stores in Kuwait and Bahrain after logging sales of $4 million last year via its shops in 4 Middle Eastern countries, including Jordan and the UAE. This trend has been driven by a rise in cosmetics exports to these regions in recent years. Data by the Korea Customs Service show the country's cosmetics exports to Peru have jumped to $233,000 this year from mere $54,000 in 2011, while exports to Colombia have climbed to $459,000 so far this year from $319,000 in 2011. The agency attributes the jump to the rising popularity of Korean cultural content and an increasing demand for cosmetics in both regions, even though the cosmetics industry is still relatively undeveloped in both places. In the past 3 years alone, the total volume of Korean cosmetics exports has shot up more than 124%, amounting to nearly $18 trillion last year. Kim Ji-yeon, Business Daily.
With huge discounts and promising deals, Black Friday is a major attraction for shoppers not only in the U.S., but those in Korea as well. But Seoul's antitrust body warns consumers to be on high alert and follow basic guidelines when going after these online deals to get the most out of the major sales events. Our Lee Ju-young explains.
Kim Yoon-ho this past July ordered a Bluetooth device for his motorcycle helmet with the help of a Korean online shopping intermediary company, but it took more than 3 months just to get the equipment.
I couldn't get a refund, even though it took 3 to 4 months to get it. They told me I wouldn't be able to, since that's what it said on the Japanese website.
Kim is just one of the estimated 3,400 Koreans who have filed complaints against botched overseas purchases in the first half of this year. The country's Fair Trade Commission says over 80% of these complaints were due to overseas shopping agencies that act as a bridge between local consumers and foreign e-commerce companies. As the government anticipates a large number of Koreans will turn to these local online agencies during America's Black Friday sales this week, Korea's Fair Trade Commission has issued a consumer alert to protect consumers and minimize damage. The commission explains that business with shopping agencies is still subject to Korean laws, and therefore consumers can receive both refunds and exchanges for their products within 7 days of purchase. In addition, this all should be guaranteed without extra penalties or compensation for losses. It also advises buyers to use credit cards and pay in the currency the product is being sold in to prevent the possibility of getting slapped with differing exchange rates that could push up the overall price. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that brings us to the end. But we'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. Thanks for watching and see you soon.